Christianity and Islam are the two largest worldviews on the planet. We host real, honest conversations about the world's most important issues.
Will you distance yourself from those who think differently, or will you join us at the table and talk about what is really important? This is the Al-Ma'idah Initiative, conversation without compromise.
And so that is capable of producing widespread courage and battle against corruption in ordinary people that secularism just has nothing to promise.
Right.
Has no ultimate hope. It has some compelling ideas that it has fundamentally borrowed from the Bible, right? But it has rejected the things that actually have transformative power,
right,
to fix things.
I mean, the flip side of that is it reminds me of a neighbor I had. We had our neighbors were Pashtus, and their son was a little younger than me. One of their sons was a little younger than me, and we all used to just hang out on my front porch, and talk. And he left for a while. He was kind of like a problem child, but then he got steeped in Islam and came back, and we were having a conversation. This is after 9/11 about, what had happened, and the motivations of the people who did it. And honestly, his response was, well, they have a point, right? Like, sounds right to me, and to me, that's shocking because, I'm not in that system, and obviously, but to him, it resonated in some way. And I think that unless you have Christianity, right, like an opposing viewpoint, to kind of say, okay, as a human being, I want to act and behave in a certain way, right? But this is the way that we've always done it. Mm-hmm. You could look at them and be sympathetic to what they're trying to do, because there's obvious things in the world. There's sin, right? There's moral degradation. There's corruption. There's all these things that are oppressive to humanity. And the people who are, Muslim and in your camp, right? Like from your area or from surrounding areas are saying, this is the way we fix this problem. See, this doesn't deal with the Ghani premise doesn't deal with that. It doesn't deal with this idea that, the world's messed up. Like, people are dying all over the place. They're getting massacred everywhere. And what you just said was, what can happen, from a Christian mindset is to be able to sit there and say, well, we have God on our side. But that's exactly what the Taliban are doing. Right? That's exactly what the Taliban are doing. And right now, they're, happy as can be because they feel vindicated, right? Like, Allah drove the infidel out, and here we are, and now we have our land. And, I know that not everybody obviously is going to it's not like they didn't have a first act with it, right? It was really awful. And, people who are bought into this kind of progress that he's talking about in the book are, running for their lives and trying to get out. But there's a very common denominator of people over there who are poor, who are the people that he's trying to reach in this book, who are just going to go over to the other side, because it does address those things. It does address moral depravity. It does address what they call the great Satan, know.
So it's actually the problem is that you can't live in the world without having a God, right? An ultimate standard.
Sure.
And the Taliban have a very clearly defined moral standard that's easy to find compelling, right?
Right.
And the answer of this...
It's a much simpler pitch.
Yeah. Whereas the answer of this crowd, tends to be, well, that's not real Islam. Mm-hmm. Well, what is real Islam? Not that.
Right.
It's like, he doesn't have a concise worldview of how to respond to the Taliban, because this is actually the central struggle of Islam in the world right now, is that it's just this sort of like battle of the scholars.
Right.
And you kind of have all these authorities say that these authorities and these people are not legitimate. Well, our authorities say that your authorities are not legitimate.
Sure.
And Islam was sort of designed to function, it had to have this sort of centralized figure in times past.
Sure.
And that person no longer exists to say, no, you guys are wrong. These scholars are the right scholars. It's just, just all these different things. It depends which state is sponsoring people at this point.
Right.
So there's no like compelling countervision to the Taliban that holistically addresses people. It assumes that people are just kind of great already.
Right.
That's what secularism is. Well, even the Taliban would be great if they just had money and education and.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Yeah. All they need is a couple Humvees. That's it. Everything's going to be great if you make them feel like they have a military, for instance, right?
Right.
They have their own security in their hands. Well, yeah, right.
So because of this assumption, right, which is actually a common assumption between secularism and Islam, the people are a blank slate.
Right.
That if you give people the right circumstance and setting, they'll just sort of naturally flourish into good people.
Sure.
So what that leads is this systems-based approach. That our goal is to take out the wrong system, put the right system in place so people can thrive.
Right.
But that mindset leads to, well, what happens when that system is not in place?
Right.
You are paralyzed.
Right. I mean, I think that what it's trying to do is lure people with positives, right? Without talking. I mean, in Christianity, they call it positive Christianity. The first megachurch in America was founded on this idea that you could, not preach about sin, right? And that you would just preach this positivity over and over again, and that people would be drawn to just the positive aspects of it, right? But you never really deal with, out of that we get prosperity teaching, we get all of this confusion about what sin actually is. But in this case, trying to do that with like democracy, they'll just be naturally drawn to democracy. They don't know what it is. I mean, we had the same problem in Iraq. They had never tasted freedom, right? Once we give them freedom, they're gonna know it. They're gonna know it, and they're gonna run to it. Well, okay. How many? Like, what would you say? How many? Like, what's the population percentage that actually did that? Right? That actually responded to this idea and was willing to fight for it and die for it and lay their lives down for it. Because to them, it's just another idea.
Yeah.
It's not their reality.
Well, so listen to this line.
Mm-hmm.
There is no essence to the state, as states are instruments of collective power. Right?
Right.
So...
Okay.
So it kind of comes back to this question of, okay, what kind of people are you filling that collective with?
Right. I mean, you could fill them with... it's funny because, the idea of a Christian nation is frightening in America, right? To secularists. It's just this idea that the country could be, influenced by Christianity, right? Like one nation under God. And there's just always just been this active, especially since this, the 60s, this idea of separation of church and state, which is honestly nowhere in the Constitution. It's a secular idea, right? Like we want our secularism, we want our atheism, we want to be able to observe whatever system we want. But this idea of having, a concrete set of values that's shared by everybody, right, is frightening to them because honestly, they don't want to be a part of that. And I can get where people would feel like that's exclusive, right? Like this is where, bad things happen. This is how you get cults. This is how you get, Christian nations wanting to go on crusades and stuff like that. And I understand that. I think the hard part, and you can, obviously speak to this. The problem we have in the world is that the things that they have tried to replace the Christian standard with are deficient morally. And it has, resulted in a century of more bloodshed than there has been in the entire world, right? And you can lay that on technology. We have more accurate weapon systems, like it's a lot easier to kill a bunch of people now than it was back then. But the scale of which It's happened from people in power versus people who are not able to defend themselves, right? So just look at Stalin and the number of people that he killed, in the name of preserving his brand of communism, is staggering. Right. And that's a replacement of this idea that we should all love our neighbor, like love God as you love yourself, and love the Lord. It says Shema on the V'ahavta. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And we've replaced that with there is no God. The state is God. And whoever runs the state is a God. I mean, it's just how it plays out. It'll never be admitted to, right? But it's right.
Well, so I think again, part of the issues people have with Christian state is the same issues people can have with any state, which is the danger of the state is the centralization of power into one person or group, right? So the problem is men. If we're talking a state that looks like Jesus, we have a state which has servant leadership. That's by the way, the term where we get the term prime minister from in the first place. Prime first, minister, servant.
Right.
That's the goal. And where you're supposed to love and tolerate your enemies.
Right.
So a nation which is influenced by Christianity, and the Bible believes in the separation of powers, right? The priesthood and the kingship are separate. They have different functions.
Sure.
A nation that's saturated in Christianity should be a place of tolerance and welcome for those who are different.
Right.
And what Christianity gives us is not a perfect society, but it gives us a standard by which we can push back against the imperfections of society, which is how we got toleration of dissenters in the first place here.
Right.
Because John Locke can look at the life of Jesus and he say, look, guys, if Jesus doesn't use coercion on his enemies, and he's God, how much less can his people use coercion to try and change the minds of our enemies? Right?
Sure.
We have to have toleration. So, like if you're going to have a God is unavoidable, right? So in this, God is the state functionally.
Right.
God is the collective
right.
people's will.
Right.
And the problem is, in Afghanistan, the collective people's will led to what happened. The collective people's will ended up being corruption, self-serving on a wide scale.
Good point.
It's not just the government.
Yep.
And the collective people's will ended up being the Taliban as well.
Right.
Because they're not just invaders. There's popular support on a wide scale.
Yeah.
In Afghanistan for people like the Taliban.